All right, so talking about situations I want to create, I'm going to tell you a story about underage gambling. Right? Makes sense, right? So that's me when I was 17 years old with my little brother. My little brother is not part of this story, but this was the picture I could find on Facebook on short notice. So that's when I was 17, so that's the one that you get. My parents were divorced, and my father lived in Nevada for as long as I can remember. And he moved to Las Vegas when I was about 17 years old. So he lived in Las Vegas. I visited every summer. On my first summer there, he looked at me and thought, oh, he looks old enough, we could probably get him into a casino. So he actually took me gambling on the Strip when I was 17 years old. Now, I knew poker well enough, right? So I understood the structure of how one should play, what you should hold, what you should discard in 5-card draw. But we needed to be somewhere kind of out of the way in the casino, so I wouldn't be attracting unwanted attention. And it happened the machines that were out of the way were double bonus poker. Now, double bonus poker is basically poker, but it's got slightly different odds. So you can't just use your usual strategies that you would use playing normal poker. You have to hold aces a little more often. You need to hold low pairs like 2s, 3s, and 4s more often. And so my dad was coaching me on the proper strategy to play double bonus poker. Now, this actually turned out really well. I had the best night of gambling I'd ever had because it was my first night, but also the best night I've ever had. We won, $700 to $1,000 just playing video poker. We were very happy with ourselves. I've never had that happen since then, and I don't plan to, because obviously going and putting a bunch of money in double bonus poker is not a very sound financial decision, right? That it's a game designed for you to lose. But I also want to tell you about a news story that was big in the gambling world, which was there was an online game called Ocean Magic. And a bunch of bettors in New Jersey found a flaw in this game. So they figured out that there were these golden wild bubbles that you can see there. And when they were in certain positions before you spun, you actually had a significant edge over the house. So you could win repeatedly and reliably if you timed your big bets to when these golden bubbles were in certain positions. And so they found that flaw. They played it for a week. They won $1 million. They were really pleased with themselves. It made all the trade magazines before the casinos pulled this game offline, right? And then the casinos were a little slow to pay them, citing some unknown violations of policy. But that's a really good night of gambling, much better than my $1,000 night, winning $1 million. But now we should put our business school student hats on and think, well, why is that a news story that these guys won $1 million in a week? A big casino makes $1 million to $3 million every day. So why is it such a big deal that we can come up with this great strategy in Ocean Magic and win $1 million when we could also just be casinos? And this is what I want to talk about when we think about how to help teams. So there's two big levers that we have to pull when we're trying to make a team perform better. One is structure. We can think about who's on the team. How many people do we have? Do we have 5? Do we have 2? Do we have 3 or 4? What's the mix of knowledge and skills that we have on that team? What roles do we have? We can talk about our goals. Things like, are we going to go for height or are we going to go for creativity? What's the balance of those things? We can talk about the tasks that we give them. Should we even have a bunch of teams making marshmallow towers with spaghetti? Is that a good idea for teams to do? And we can talk about the norms that we have for how we communicate with one another and share information. Now, those are really powerful levers for changing teams. But it's interesting that when most people think of changing team performance, they actually think of this other lever, coaching. So usually when we think of team leadership, we think of examples of sports coaches who are coming up with a clever strategy and implementing it to defeat their opponent, giving rousing speeches at halftime or before the game. And that seems like also an important, powerful way to influence team performance. But which one should we do when, and how should we think about the balance of these two things? Well, luckily there's a really excellent study on this that was done by Ruth Wagaman, who studied teams of technicians at Xerox. And this was in the 1990s. So, having ubiquitous Xerox machines was still kind of a new thing. They were coming up with new models all the time. And because these new models were aging at different rates, technicians were encountering new problems all the time. They did not always they weren't routine yet. So technicians had to do a ton of learning, a ton of knowledge exchange to do this. And Xerox reorganized their workforce into self-managing teams. And as part of this, Ruth got a chance to measure something that we usually don't get a chance to measure, which was middle managers' coaching behaviors of these self-managing teams. So in other words, there were regional managers who oversaw teams of usually around 9 technicians, and they would try and help those teams by coaching them. And they could do really important things like helping them learn from one another, helping them develop good strategies, creating a climate where they felt comfortable talking to one another and sharing information. And they could also do really bad things, like they could micromanage, they could yell at people, they could be abusive. And so Ruth got a chance to measure both of these things, these good and bad coaching behaviors, and see which teams were most helped and most hurt by different kinds of coaching. And what she found was here, the green lines at the top are teams that, according to the textbook, were doing what research has shown to be the good things about structure. They had well-defined tasks, they had clearly defined norms, they had clear goals that were clear to all the members, they were well composed with the right mix of knowledge, talents, and skills. And we can see they consistently did better no matter what than poorly structured teams, which are in red here along the bottom. But what's interesting is who benefited and was harmed by these coaching behaviors. So the benefits of positive leader coaching went almost entirely to well-designed teams. So if you were a team that had the right structure, you had the right task, you had clear goals, you had membership that was thoughtfully designed, you had explicit norms for how you were going to communicate and work together, and somebody came in and tried to motivate you or help you develop better strategy, it helped. It helped a lot. But if you were poorly structured, you had unclear goals, you didn't have the right mix of knowledge and skills, you didn't have clear norms, those teams didn't benefit from coaching almost at all. So in other words, you can't coach your way out of a bad structure. If you try, you're pretty destined to fail. On the other hand, the well-structured teams were inoculated against the harms of micromanaging and abusive leadership. That they were harmed a little bit, of course, because that's a bad thing, it's a harmful thing to do. But they weren't harmed nearly as much as the poorly structured teams who took the brunt of this. So in other words, when it comes to teams, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But that structure needs to come before coaching if you want teams to benefit from good coaching and be inoculated from the harms of bad coaching. So in other words, structure is thinking like the casino. If you're building a team, if you're managing a team, if you're a member of a team, you want to stack the deck in favor of that team succeeding. You want to do everything you can to structure the game so it's designed for the team to win. But if you're trying to coach yourself out of a game that's already rigged against you, you might win once in a while, right? You might get lucky like we did. But most of the time, you're going to lose in the long run. Now, it turns out that although usually people nod along when I tell them about this, when you put people on their own to diagnose team problems and decide what interventions to do, these are not the choices they make. So we do have data on this as well, that when you give people a dysfunctional team and say, hey, what do you want to change about this dysfunctional team? 84% of people go straight to process. You have a team where it looks like people are unmotivated, you try and give them the motivational speech. People are fighting with one another, we try and navigate that interpersonal conflict and we intervene directly to the group process. 16% say, oh, it's the people. We need to kick someone off the team. We need to get someone new on the team. Sometimes that's right. But only 5% actually pull the strongest lever they have available and go to try and alter team structure. So the lesson that I hope you take away here is that structure should come first. When you are looking at how your teams performed, almost all the teams here failed. And why did they fail? Because they were given a poorly structured task. You were not given enough time. You were not given the opportunity to experiment. You were not told what knowledge and skills you needed or given the chance to find it. You didn't even know how many people the task would require or what resources were required. So the whole deck was stacked against you. And yet, if I had this debrief and didn't say this, we could have a whole discussion about your internal group dynamics and why that was determining whether you succeeded or failed. So what I hope you guys take away is that if you see a problem in a group, and if you are in a position, you're an entrepreneur, you're a team leader, fix the structure first. Think this through before the team ever meets. If a problem emerges, look back to these structural factors before you start to then say, okay, now how can I coach this team to perform better? All right, so again, Collective Edge available at the bookstore near you. Please do keep in touch. I will be writing about this stuff regularly on Substack and LinkedIn. And if you really like it, then join the launch team and I'll give you all kinds of good stuff. So thank you guys. And we do have 5 minutes. Wow, I blasted through this for questions. Thank you.